July 9th, 2010. It's a warm summer day in Addis, Louisiana, a small community located on the banks of the Mississippi in West Baton Rouge Parish.
It's a suburb of Baton Rouge, upscale, very attractive housing there.
Everyone's connected, and it's very much a neighbor-friendly area, low crime.
But the quiet, crime-free reputation of Addis is about to be tested in an unimaginable way. At approximately 12:45 p.m., 41-year-old mother of two, Monique Kitts, returns home from work on her lunch break with her two children, 18-year-old Dory and 11-year-old Corey Jr.
When we opened the door, we saw glass.
There was glass shattered on the floor. And she said the first thing she thought was, I'll be damned. Corey done knocked my vase over.
Corey is Monique's husband of 16 years. After calling out his name, Monique and her children head to the master bedroom.
Corey? Dad, Corey!
When she got to the room, she saw he was in the bed.
My mom went to tap his foot, and then I noticed she hurried up and backed up, and she was saying something's not right. She noticed blood. She just started screaming.
Moments later, 911 dispatchers receive a call from the Kitts residence.
Oh, God, help me. There's blood right here.
She's hysterical, she's screaming, she's hollering. The kids are screaming and they're hollering.
I just walked in my door, there was glass everywhere.
Someone broke into your house?
Yes, somebody must have broken into my, oh my God.
Unsure if the shooter is still on the premises, the operator instructs Monique to lock her bedroom door and remain there with her two children. Minutes later, police arrive at the scene.
When we went through the door, guns were drawn. When you hear possible burglary in progress, you got to think, we got an armed suspect there. What are we looking at? Is it more than one? We slowly go through the whole residence. We each took an area. We wanted to make sure nobody was in there. Nothing was found.
Children in the background, just like screaming and hollering. Maybe the person is still in the home or in the bedroom, because someone could still be there.
Police department.
When I first laid eyes upon Monique, Dory, and Corey Kitts Jr., they were up against the wall facing the bed and were screaming.
It doesn't take long for investigators to realize precisely why Monique and her children are so upset.
I noticed Corey Kitts on the bed, covered with blood. As I approached the body, I saw there was 3 bullet holes in his head.
He was found killed and lying there in a pool of his own blood.
As police begin clearing the crime scene, the Kitts family seems shell-shocked. For Monique and Corey Kitts, it's a horrific ending to what had been a seemingly all-American romance. Born in 1969, Monique Oubry grew up in an upper-middle-class home in Plaquemine, Louisiana.
My mother has 5 children. All of us are spoiled, every last one. As you can probably imagine, Monique was spoiled also.
She was just very well liked and she got along with everybody.
Monique's bright, vivacious personality made her a beloved classmate by the time she hit high school.
She was always on the go, doing something. Like I said, she was always friendly, so she always had a lot of friends.
After high school, Monique attended McNeese State University in nearby Lake Charles, where she majored in childhood education.
She loves kids. She's always loved kids. She didn't want to teach at school. She wanted daycare.
After college, Monique returned to Plaquemine to start working full-time at a supercenter. While retail wasn't Monique's dream job, the hard-working sales associate met another store employee who would change her life forever. His name was Corey Kitts.
Miss Monique, how are you?
I'm fine, Mr. Corey. How are you?
I'm doing well.
He would always come in the department where she was, clowning around, and they just became friends.
Corey was a nice-looking guy.
Like Monique, Corey grew up in Plaquemine and was also known for his outgoing personality.
He had a big crush on her, and he was always doing sweet little things. He was so charismatic, and his personality and sense of humor actually won her over.
It was like he swept her off her feet.
Pretty soon, Monique and Corey were inseparable.
She loved the ground he walked on. She loved Corey, and Corey loved Monique.
That's how she felt about him. He was her world. He was her heart.
Within a few months, they moved in together. And not long after that, Monique broke some big news to her mother.
I said, okay, what is it? Well, they had started staying together by this time. I'm gonna have a baby. I said, well, when you sleep with a man every night, those things happen.
In November of 1991, Monique gave birth to their daughter, Dory. Soon after, the couple officially tied the knot.
You could tell just by being around them that they were in love.
Monique was very excited when she had Dory. She didn't really want to go back to work. He didn't want her to go back to work. And that's when their daycare business came about.
With Corey's love and support, Monique's dream of running a daycare became a reality. And soon, business was booming.
Within a month, she had so many kids, they didn't have anywhere to put them. She loved them. She was good to them.
Monique's daycare business proved so successful that by 1999, she moved the daycare out of her home and into a new location in Plaquemine. However, that wasn't the only good news she and Corey received that year.
Monique and Corey had a second child, a beautiful son they named Corey Jr.
Not long after the birth of their son, Corey landed a well-paying job at a local chemical plant.
Corey was an operator, really good job, in this area.
He was making good money, maybe $80,000 to $100,000 or more income.
Over the next decade, the happy couple enjoyed the fruits of their hard-earned labor and moved into their dream home in Addis, Louisiana.
She had her income with the daycare and including his, so she was set up pretty good.
I used to always say I wanted her life because to me, she had it all. She had a good husband. She had a nice, big, beautiful house.
But on the afternoon of July 9th, 2010, Corey and Monique's dream life was ripped apart.
Monique goes in and finds her husband dead.
It's still unbelievable to me, like, still a shock. Like, my daddy's not here.
Corey was always happy-go-lucky. Who would do this? Why would somebody want to kill Corey?
What investigators are about to discover will turn the case upside down and have folks in the quiet little town of Addis questioning everything they thought they knew about this picture-perfect couple.
You start realizing something's not right.
After 16 years of marriage, Monique Kitts and her husband Corey were living the good life in Addis, Louisiana. But at approximately 12:45 p.m. on July 9th, 2010, their life together was turned upside down.
Monique Kitts and her children came back to the house, and they then walked into the bedroom, and that's where they found Corey laying in the bed. Was unresponsive. He had been shot.
As police work to secure the scene and console Monique and her children, word of the shooting reaches their family.
I said, what happened? What happened? Somebody just shot Corey. I said, oh my God.
By the time we got there, it was a circus. Monique was in like a despondent attitude. And when she saw my mom, it was like she just broke down.
With the family sequestered outside the house, investigators begin processing the crime scene.
Mr. Kitts was shot 3 times. It looked like someone had got into the home and shot Mr. Kitts in his sleep.
Next to Corey's body, investigators find 3 spent shell casings.
So what do you got?
3 .40 caliber casings.
Given the condition of the Kitts' home, robbery seems a likely motive.
Rest of the house pretty ransacked. Let's go check it out.
The house had broken glass on the floor near the entrance door. And the furniture in the house, some of it was turned upside down.
It looked like a break-in.
But looks can be deceiving, especially once investigators conduct a more thorough search of the premises.
It didn't take long to figure that there's no signs of forced entry, so now we got a problem.
Nothing was stolen. They had money, they had a weapon, they had computers, they had flat screen TV, a number of things that were never touched. It appeared to be very much a staged scene. The point of it was not to commit a robbery, but to go in and kill a man.
But why Corey Kitts? That afternoon, investigators begin questioning Corey's grieving spouse, Monique.
Monique was upset, visibly upset.
When I interviewed her the first time, I was asking her questions about, particularly that day, what was going on.
According to Monique, her husband had worked the previous evening.
He came in, 5:15.
In the morning?
He went home and took a shower. Monique says that they talked, they clowned a little bit.
She then left to meet Corey's sister.
I got up to go walking. Came back. He was still woke. I told him I walked 3 miles. He laughed at me.
And then what happened?
I went to work.
Monique says that shortly after noon, she left work and took her children home so they could all have lunch together at the house. That's when they discovered Corey in a pool of blood on the bed.
Ready, time.
And he didn't move. I didn't know what was wrong. And then that's when I saw the blood, and I just screamed.
Monique's daughter, Dory, confirms her mother's account.
Did your mama come back home? Were you aware if she came back home, or do you know where she was at the time?
As for Dory, she claims she left their home around 8:40 that morning.
Left, and I walked downstairs, and his door was closed, so I figured he must still be asleep because he had just got off, so I didn't mess with him.
Dory worked at the daycare during the summer. She went to work. My mother had Corey Jr., so she brought Corey to the daycare. That's why the 3 of them went home to lunch together, and that's when they found Corey.
It was crazy. Like, it was really just a surreal moment to ask, how was my mom and dad's relationship? How was our relationship?
Dory is adamant that neither she nor her mother had anything to do with her dad's death. But she believes she might know someone who did.
On June the 9th, 1 month before their homicide, Corey Kitts comes home and he sees a red car backed up across the street from his home.
I just feel like somebody's watching.
Could the unidentified driver of this car be the same individual who murdered Corey in cold blood? Investigators are about to discover a half-dozen reasons why that might just be true, each one more tawdry and tantalizing than the next.
This is not going to be a typical case. I was absolutely shocked at the content of it.
We all knew about the other woman, but 6 women?
Just hours after the shooting death of 40-year-old Corey Kitts, police in Addis, Louisiana have learned a startling piece of information from Corey's daughter.
Maybe a month or so before the murder of Corey Kitts, he had saw a red car that was kind of suspicious that was around the neighborhood.
I just feel like somebody's watching.
Investigators wonder, had Corey simply been paranoid? Or could this theory have legs? When police interview one of the Kitts' neighbors, Sean Monroe, they get a possible answer.
The neighbor said a silver truck was backed in the driveway.
Probably been after 7:30 or something. I went outside. I saw like a metallic silver vehicle that was bagged up behind Corey's truck. It wasn't there long, but it was there.
While that vehicle description did not match the one given by Dory, it did indicate that someone, or possibly multiple people, paid Corey a visit on the morning of the murder.
And because the Kitts' home showed no signs of a break-in, investigators think whoever killed Corey had access to the home.
If you didn't have forced entry, then somebody had a key, or somebody let him in.
The question now is, who besides Monique and her daughter had access to the home?
To answer that question, detectives take a deeper look at Corey's personal life.
We're in a small town. Everybody knows everybody's business.
We just kept getting a lot of feedback that Corey was having some affairs, and we know that that's one of the things that you have to, could very well be one of those people.
In order to confirm the allegations of infidelity, detectives reach out to the friends and relatives of the Kitts family.
First of all, we heard rumors that Corey wasn't that faithful of a husband.
I'm afraid that's true.
Monique chose not to believe it for years. And then it must have gotten where there was other people that she really trusts, that came to her and told her, this is what's going on. I said, well, you can do one of two things. You can stay there and put up with it, or you can pick up your bags and walk out the door. She said, well, I don't want to go anywhere. I want to make my marriage work.
But Monique's mother says the harder her daughter worked to save her marriage, the more difficult it became.
We discovered that he was having 5 or 6 affairs.
We all knew about the other woman, but 6 women?
The revelation that Corey was carrying on not 1, but 6 affairs at the time of his death opens up a Pandora's box of possible killers.
All these women were potential suspects because it could have been one of them was mad because they might have found out about another one.
So now, guess what? You need to go figure out, where were they? Do they know anything about what's going on? What was the relationship about?
Over the next 2 months, detectives identify all 6 of Corey's lovers and bring them in for questioning. They start with Corey's co-worker, Janice Thompson, who's allegedly been sleeping with Corey for 10 years.
So you and Corey were having a thing?
Yes, we had a fling. But at the end of the day, we both always went home to our families. I never hurt Corey.
Janice Thompson swears to detectives that she's innocent and was at work at the time of the murder. Given her cooperation, it appears that she is telling the truth.
But even with Janice Thompson eliminated as a suspect, there are 5 more of Corey's paramours investigators need to question.
Of course, the people that he may have had affairs with were viable suspects. Every one of them was looked into. It was determined that they had nothing to do with this murder. He did have extramarital affairs, but as a whole, nothing to indicate that they wanted murdered.
But if these 6 women weren't involved, then who was?
Police seized Corey's telephone records. Really, the records of the entire family. They did this in order to figure out any connections they may have overlooked.
It's that search of Corey and Monique's cell phone records that reveals something truly unexpected and explosive.
Once Monique's cell phone records were analyzed, it was apparent that Corey Kitts was not the only man in her life.
The slaying of 40-year-old Corey Kitts inside his home 2 months prior has residents in Addis, Louisiana on edge, and local investigators scrambling for answers.
The investigation revealed that Corey was actively having relationships with 6 different women.
Through the cell records, we were able to determine that they were not anywhere in the vicinity of the time of the homicide.
But when police expand their phone record search to include Corey and his immediate family, 2 calls jump out at them.
Like, man, something's really weird in the phone records of Monique.
On the day of the homicide, Monique Kitts was talking with Carl Michael and David Ray Johnson.
Who were Carl Michael and David Ray Johnson, and what was their connection to Monique? To answer that question, investigators again circle back to Corey and Monique's extended family.
She met a young man who delivered milk to the daycare. His name was David Johnson.
He came to the daycare. We had about 4 or 5 different milkmen, and he was the friendliest. He was the most helpful.
Hello, how are you? I got your milk for you. You doing all right today?
Those close to Monique suspected that the handsome and charming David Ray Johnson might have been delivering her more than just fresh milk.
He definitely came off as someone who was very confident about his ability to get women. You know, maybe he was a charmer.
Call you later.
Oh, okay.
Good to see you.
Okay. I asked her one day, is something going on between you and David? Oh my God. That was her favorite word. Oh my God, Mama. Why would you ask me something like that? I said, I have my reasons.
For investigators, rumors of an affair between Monique and David Johnson are reason enough to haul the handsome milkman in for questioning.
David Ray Johnson being this woman's man, I could see him thinking that since she wasn't going to leave her husband, and he had this affair, it would seem to me he certainly had a motive.
Under questioning, David says he first met Monique in 2006.
She was the owner. She was one who paid me. I met her like that.
David says he and Monique maintained a strictly professional relationship. That is until a few months later, when Monique approached him after one of his deliveries.
We kind of exchanged numbers, and I asked her, was it for business or pleasure?
And her answer was?
And she was like, you decide.
I believe that's what she was longing for at the time, and that moved into a sexual relationship.
She rented and leased an apartment for him so he'd have somewhere to stay, and allegedly so they would have some place to meet up and carry on their affair.
She was texting, she was calling, she paid bills for David Ray Johnson during the course of their relationship, gave him money.
She was having an affair with him, but she was helping him out, and she had the financial means to do so.
I could see him thinking that if Corey was out of the way, he could get more out of her. He had a motive.
But according to David Johnson, that simply wasn't the case.
David admits he had talked to Monique the morning of the shooting, but claimed they had stopped seeing each other a few months before. He also claimed he was delivering milk the morning of the shooting.
When did you find out that Corey Kitts was dead?
When I ended my route.
We knew David could not have possibly murdered Corey. We know where he was the entire time of the homicide.
And while police decide to keep David Johnson on their radar, they shift their focus to the other man Monique appears to have called the morning of the murder, a man named Carl Michael Howard.
The interesting thing here is that Monique didn't just call Carl Howard once or twice. In fact, they exchanged over 700 telephone calls in the months leading up to the day of the murder.
David Ray Johnson and Carl Michael Howard were best friends. Monique had been doing David's taxes, and Carl Michael needed someone to do his taxes for him. And David introduced the two of them.
Like David and Monique, Carl hailed from Baton Rouge, though he now called Atlanta, Georgia home.
He was a technician at a cell phone company.
Carl Howard worked for Verizon. He had an engineering degree in cell technology.
They became very good friends over the years. He was just also a fun-loving person, very humorous, liked to crack jokes, loved to talk.
Was Monique carrying on an affair with Carl Michael Howard as well as David Johnson? Monique's family doesn't think so, and they are convinced Carl is not violent.
And if you be around him and you talk to him, he is so nice. He reminds you of a big teddy bear. I don't think he has a mean bone in his body.
While Monique's family doesn't believe Carl had anything to do with Corey's death, investigators spot a red flag.
Carl Howard made 4 trips to Louisiana from Atlanta, which we were able to track. He comes in April, then the very end of March, the 1st of April. He comes in June, he comes in July.
In fact, phone records indicate Carl Michael Howard was in Baton Rouge on the day of the murder.
Every time he would come, he would contact David Ray Johnson. He would contact Monique on every one of these trips.
So they decide to bring Carl in for questioning, and they get right to the point.
Did y'all have any kind of intimate affair, you and her? She'll be straight, man. You know, if you did, you did. Is that your little buddy? Not at all. Did you speak with Monique the day of the murder? Yeah, early that morning. What did y'all talk about? Nothing, just chit-chat.
We know he was in Baton Rouge. He did not deny that, but he said he was with his sister. They had went to her house that morning, and he was out with her that whole day shopping for cakes for the birthday party for her daughter.
Detectives intend to check out Carl's story, but before they release him, they learn something else.
Carl Howard's vehicle was a red car. On June the 9th, 1 month before their homicide, Corey Kitts comes home and he sees a red car backed up across the street from his home.
But perhaps the biggest red flag surrounding Carl Howard was the other phone call he made the day of the shooting.
Monique Kitts was talking with Carl and David Ray Johnson. There was then conversation later with Corey Knox and Carl Howard. Corey Knox was more of a person that we would call a career criminal.
Who had been in trouble with the police on several occasions, known to sell drugs, known to carry guns.
It was just too much of a coincidence. It just seemed very suspicious.
But detectives still aren't sure how all these pieces fit together.
How are these people connected? How do they know one another? What is the extent of their relationship?
This is where you start to see, from the outside looking in, that there was this plot.
You said y'all wasn't perfect. What was the biggest discussions about?
Money.
The investigation into the murder of 40-year-old Corey Kitts has unearthed a string of extramarital affairs of both Corey and his wife, Monique. It's also led police to focus their investigation on 2 men, Monique's friend, Carl Michael Howard, and an ex-con named Corey Knox.
Corey Knox had had many scrapes with the police before.
But while Corey's criminal past is illuminating, so too are his and Carl Michael Howard's phone records.
On the morning of the murder, Carl called David Johnson and Monique, which wasn't unusual, but then there were a series of calls between Carl Howard and Corey Knox, leading right up to the murder.
It was determined on the morning of the murder that Carl's cell phone pinged several times off of a cell tower near Corey Knox's home in North Baton Rouge.
But in the hours after that flurry of calls, both Carl Howard and Corey Knox's cell phones went suspiciously cold.
Their phones aren't pinging off of any towers. They just go completely silent.
Their phone is blacked out. And then what's going on during that period? There's a murder.
That's just too much of a coincidence.
Despite detective suspicions, there's still the question of Carl Howard's alibi.
He stated that he hadn't been with family the whole day.
But when investigators speak to Carl's sister, she tells them a different story.
She told us, I don't lie. She said, I'm not going to lie for anyone and get myself in trouble. He was not with me. He did not go with me that morning. She said, the only time I saw him was that evening.
So you were out birthday shopping with your brother?
No, not with him.
So you didn't see him at all that day? Between his phony alibi, his phone records, and the fact that Carl's car was seen at the Kitts' residence 1 month prior to the date of the murder, it looks like Carl killed Corey Kitts with the help of Corey Knox.
Still, investigators need to determine if the two other people Carl spoke with the morning of the murder might be involved.
We found numerous contacts the day before and on the day of the homicide. Numerous calls made by Carl Howard, by David Ray Johnson, and with Monique.
Of particular interest to detectives are the multiple calls and texts Monique made in the hours leading up to her husband's murder, nearly all of them to David Johnson and Carl Howard.
She stays on that phone for approximately 19-20 minutes, all the way while she's driving to Plaquemine from Addis on her way to work to a daycare. She arrives at a daycare about 8:05 in the morning. She hangs up the phone, I think, with David Ray Johnson, and she's still on that phone with Carl Howard for another 4 minutes.
All that morning, you got talk between them. You got her talking with Carl Howard, with David Ray, and then everything stops after the murder.
On October 14th, 2010, roughly 3 months after her husband was murdered, Monique Kitts is questioned for a second time. Investigators ask Monique to describe her relationship with Carl Howard and how often they spoke on the phone.
Occasionally. Every now and then, maybe.
How can you have 60-something calls in one day, one morning? That ain't limited contact. That's a lot of contact.
Monique, you text them a lot. You talk to them a lot.
The volume of calls and texts between Monique and Carl Howard isn't detectives' only point of contention.
In the last 6 months, are you involved with any other personal relationships that may come out?
Nothing.
Detectives knew that was a lie, that she was in fact in a recent relationship with David Johnson.
Do you have any information about why your husband was killed or who did it that you have not told us?
No, I've told you everything.
While detectives think there's more to the story than Monique is letting on, without further evidence linking her to the crime, they have no choice but to release her.
Monique does have an alibi. Police were looking for something more than just a string of cell phone records in order to connect her with the murder of her husband.
Looking into their financial records, investigators determined the Kitts were barely keeping their heads above water, Monique in particular.
She didn't have any money. Everybody thought her business was doing well, but you know, she was spending a lot of money. She was giving a lot of money to David, her boyfriend.
In fact, the excess spending had driven the couple to the brink of financial ruin.
Corey wanted to file bankruptcy, and they initiated the bankruptcy.
As police dig deeper into Corey and Monique's finances, they stumble on what they think might be the real motive for the murder.
Basically, what it boiled down to was life insurance.
There was a large insurance policy he had on himself that was more than $500,000.
Monique was the beneficiary of this policy, so if Corey were to die, it would kill 3 birds with 1 stone. It would put an end to financial problems, it would put an end to his cheating ways, and it would allow her to be with the man of her dreams, David Johnson.
There was this conspiracy in that Monique was going to get the insurance money, and Carl Michael Howard went in and actually did the shooting.
There was just one problem with that theory.
They talked to David Johnson, he didn't know anything about it. They talked to Corey Knox, he didn't know anything about it. They talked to Carl Michael Howard, he didn't know anything about it.
On March 5th, 2013, nearly 2.5 years after Corey Kitts was murdered, prosecutors in West Baton Rouge Parish present their findings to a grand jury.
If the grand jury says there isn't sufficient evidence, then the case is thrown out. If the grand jury says there is sufficient evidence, then charges will be filed against Monique, David Johnson, Carl Howard, and Corey Knox.
But the night before the grand jury is set to present their findings, there's a stunning development.
We talking midnight before the next day, at 9 o'clock when they were going to meet, is when David Johnson comes in with a lawyer and basically says they did it because they admitted it to me.
According to David, months after he and Monique began their affair, she began complaining about her husband on a regular basis.
I remember her joking about it like I wish he was dead, like she started joking and saying it a lot.
David says he didn't take Monique seriously until one day in 2007.
Monique actually gave David Ray Johnson money to kill her husband.
According to him, he got money from her, maybe $1,000, $2,000.
Once she gave you the $2,000, what did you do with it?
Kept it.
He just kind of took the money. He admitted he took the money and kind of didn't do anything. He wanted the money.
David has apparently no intention of trying to kill him, but as Monique applies more pressure over time, David Ray Johnson comes to the point where he says, well, maybe I do have someone, you know, and introduces her to Carl.
There's no doubt in your mind that she wanted her husband dead, is that fact? Yeah.
According to David, Carl told him the hit on Corey wouldn't come cheap. Ultimately, he and Monique agreed on a price.
He said it was over $100,000.
You know where that money was supposed to come from?
From the insurance.
Carl Michael supposedly got Corey Knox, his long-term friend, to drive him from North Baton Rouge to the town of Addis where the Kitts live.
Carl then walked inside and shot Corey Kitts as he was sleeping in the bed. And then they left.
David pretty much laid it out for the state. But despite his role of introducing Carl to Monique, he claimed he knew nothing about the murder until he saw it on the news.
We had no evidence that he was actually involved in the murder. He may have in the beginning, but he never acted on that. And from that point on, we had no evidence to show that he was involved in any further conspiracy to have Corey killed.
Although David Johnson isn't charged, prosecutors waste no time throwing the book at Monique, Carl Michael Howard, and Corey Knox.
On March 14th, 2013, the trio was formally indicted for Corey Kitts' murder.
When they came back in and they started reading, I knew what they were going to say. And I started screaming, not my child. God, not my child.
I was just numb because I knew I had to have been dreaming. This couldn't have been real.
I think I was just so hurt and shocked.
As the case heads to trial, it begins to drive a wedge between Corey and Monique's families.
It was so emotional. You had family members that are now enemies that don't speak. The tension was very thick.
Nearly 3 years after Corey Kitts was shot dead in his home, authorities in West Baton Rouge Parish had made a trio of arrests in connection with this vicious crime.
Police arrested Corey's wife, Monique, and 2 other men, Carl Howard and Corey Knox. A 4th man, David Johnson, Monique's former lover, was never charged with a crime.
A year and a half later, on October 20th, 2014, in the midst of jury selection for the trial of Monique and her co-conspirators, one more domino falls.
Corey Knox's attorney came to us and said, we have some information we would like to share with you.
Corey Knox and his attorney were looking to cut a deal with prosecutors.
When Corey and his attorney sit down with the prosecutors, he says that Carl Howard contacted him about a month before the crime.
Well, I get a phone call, and I was asked if I wanted to make some money.
Corey Knox was more of a person that was what you would call a career criminal as far as drugs and crime. He had that background, and I think that's what really got him.
Corey claims he was interested in Carl's offer until his old friend laid out the details.
When he told me, somebody wanted somebody dead, I was like, hell no.
According to Corey, he never agreed to murder anyone, but he admits he did agree to something else the night before the murder.
He asked me if I could get somebody a vehicle because his car was running hot and all of that.
So Corey agrees to borrow his mother's car, and the next morning they meet at a fast food restaurant. Corey claims they drove to a house in West Baton Rouge.
That car was a silver Dodge Durango, which matched the description of the vehicle seen in front of the Kitts' home on the day of the murder.
Corey Knox said that they turned off their cell phones, which corroborated our cell phone records because we have a period of time where there's no cell activity whatsoever.
Corey says after they arrived at the Kitts residence, Carl Howard exited the vehicle and entered the home through the back door. A few minutes later, he returned.
Corey Knox said Carl Howard walks out, has like a bank envelope of $100 bills, takes a few off, hands it to Corey, and then he leaves.
Despite the dubious timing of Corey Knox's statement, ultimately prosecutors choose to accept it at face value.
Corey Knox didn't really have a dog in the hunt. He's just a dumb friend.
The prosecution offered Corey Knox accessory after the fact in exchange for his testimony, which when you take into account his time served, he would go free after the trial.
Following this 11th hour deal, Monique Kitts and Carl Howard's trial gets underway on October 27, 2014.
The state's position was that Monique Kitts and Carl Howard had Corey killed for the money. It was basically just greed and selfishness on their part.
And thanks to the testimony of Corey Knox and Monique's ex-lover, David Johnson, the prosecutors believed they had two people that could link them to the crime.
But defense attorneys strongly disagree with the state's version of events, as well as the testimony of their so-called star witnesses.
You've got a case without corroboration. You have no eyewitnesses. And you have only statements of convicted felons, people known to be criminals, admitted liars, deceivers.
The defense also raises the issue of Corey Kitts' infidelity and his long list of lovers.
The police said they cleared all 6 of the women. But as far as any of these women's husbands, boyfriends, who would have been offended by this affair, nothing was done to my knowledge to clear any of those people.
It is under this cloud of tabloid-style revelations that both sides rest their case. As the jury retires to deliberate, nobody is sure which way the case will go.
The process was probably 6 hours when the jury would return the verdict.
Monique Kitts, she was charged with principal to second-degree murder and conspiracy to commit second-degree murder. Same with Carl Howard. The jury came back unanimously guilty on all charges.
Both defendants were sentenced to life.
For the investigators who spent over 4 long years on this case, the verdict feels like vindication.
You can absolutely look at Monique Kitts and with a clean conscience say she's the mastermind. I mean, there is no murder of Corey Kitts without Monique.
But for Monique and her supporters, the verdict is nearly impossible to fathom.
Total shock. Couldn't move, couldn't talk, couldn't do nothing. Just total shock.
My mother did not mastermind. My mother did not do anything, have anything to do with the murder of my father.
While both sides remain as steadfast today as they did in 2014, there's no denying who paid the ultimate price in this story of betrayal, lovers, and lies.
Corey Kitts did not deserve to die. Plain and